Hi everyone, in this lecture we're talking about politics. So we're going to be first talking about politics as a social institution, its basic definitions and types of political systems. Then we're going to talk about economy and how it relates to politics. So when we talk about politics, we are talking about power. Power is the ability to impose one's will on others, so thus politics is the ability on the macro level to impose one's will on others. That power is largely dependent on authority. Authority is the non-coercive, legitimate exercise of power. We can generally break authority into two classifications: coercive authority and legitimate authority. Coercive authority is the threat or use of violence to force compliance. This can be quite costly and requires surveillance and suppression. You have to hire maybe your secret police or military personnel to watch people. You have to have spies. It takes a great deal of energy to run a really terrible, ugly government, right? So regardless of the ethics to it, it's very expensive. And additionally, that type of government is very vulnerable to instability. It makes people unhappy. It makes people want to revolt against you. And when people want to revolt against you, it makes your power less stable. Legitimate authority, then, is power that is recognized as rightful by those whom it is exercised. So if your people believe that you have the right to have your authority, then they go along with it a little bit easier. Politics, then, are the methods and tactics of managing a nation or state, as well as administering and controlling its internal and external affairs. And I'll talk about the difference between a nation and a state on the next slide. Politics are not unique to democracy. In fact, every society has politics. So while we think of politics in terms of elections, that's just how our democracy does it. Other societies that don't have democracies do politics in different ways. Government, then, is the formal organized agency that exercises power and control in modern society. This is especially through the creation and enforcement of laws. That's what government does. Governments are not monolithic entities. They are typically made of many divisions and agencies within the government itself. It is a common misconception that there is just this mass thing called government, and especially among people that don't like government, to say, oh, you know, the government. Well, that's not exactly accurate. There are many different agencies within government. So if one agency is almost infinitely broken, like the Department of Motor Vehicles, that doesn't necessarily mean that another government agency is also broken. A nation, then, is a people with a common identity that are often tied with ethnicity. So this is, you could think of, we are a people, right? Who we are as Americans. That's our concept of our national identity as Americans. A state, then, and this can be confusing for us who grew up in the United States. A state is a territory with independent political authority. That's the definition of a state outside of the United States on the international level. Most other countries call their, what we call states, they call them provinces. Those are territories within the country. On the international scale, though, state means the country. So, and then to give one more definition before I give more details, we have this concept of the nation state, which is a single people or a nation being governed by a political authority or a state. Now, this idea is an artifact from the 1800s. It is a little bit of an old-fashioned idea, but it is still pretty useful in understanding international affairs. So, and this old-fashioned idea, as many old-fashioned ideas, is rooted in very old European politics. So the French nation, the French people exist within the French state, thus they are the French nation state. The German people and the German state, the German nation state, etc. We typically think of Americans as living in America, so American people, American nation state. But there are societies that do not exist within their own state. The nation is not necessarily in the state. One of the best examples of this is the Palestinian people in the State of Israel. Prior to the founding of the State of Israel, immediately after World War II, there were people that already lived there, the people now commonly known as the Palestinian people. However, after the end of World War II, international powers decided that we needed to give the Israeli people, the Jews, the Hebrew people, whatever category we're giving to those people, to give them a country. Well, that was done in a little bit of a clumsy way, and as a result of that, we gave the power of the nation to the power of the state to the nation of the Jewish people, but there were already a nation of Palestinian people already living there. And that has created a lot of international turmoil, especially in that area since immediately after World War II. Because we have a nation of people, the Palestinian people, that are within a state, the Israeli state, that they don't have any control over. And there are many, many examples of these sort of things. You can make also a comparison to most Native American tribes. They are nations within the United States of America. They have their own independent identities. They have their own independent ways and values, but they do not control the state in which they live. Often when you look at international oppression, it is because of dynamics, because of incongruities between nations and states. Now let's talk about some types of political systems. Authoritarianism is a system of government by and for a small number of elites. This includes dictatorship and totalitarianism. It should be noted that authoritarianism has been the dominant form of government for humanity for most of the time that we have existed as a species. It is only in the modern era that most societies today are now democracies, but for most of humanity's histories, we have been in authoritarian governments. A dictatorship is a form of authoritarianism in which one person seizes power to become the absolute ruler of that place. That is a dictator. And the idea of a dictatorship is quite old. One of the most famous ancient dictators was Julius Caesar, who declared himself dictator of the Roman Republic, which he then turned into the Roman Empire. Totalitarianism is a very extreme but modern form of authoritarianism, and most modern totalitarian societies are also dictatorships. Totalitarian societies are, by definition, authoritarian. Within a totalitarian government, the government seeks to completely control all aspects of citizens' lives, and if possible, they try to control how citizens think. That is the really terror of authoritarianism. And this is made possible by technology. We see the first totalitarian governments start to come into power in that area surrounding World War II. So we had Adolf Hitler come to power in Germany. We had Joseph Stalin come to power in the Soviet Union. We had the Emperor of Japan, to a lesser degree, come to power as a totalitarian leader, but he was actually more of a monarch, but that's beside the point. The reason why these types of leaders came into place during this era is because for the first time it became possible to truly spy on the citizenship of a country, right? Because the way spycraft works is that a spy has to have the ability to get information very quickly back to the leader so that the leader can say, oh, thank you for telling me that, now go kill those people I don't like, right? So because they become able to really oppress people in real time because of new telephone communications technology during that era, this type of really insidious government form comes into place. Now, as technology becomes greater, over time, the capacity for totalitarianism only becomes greater. We are quite fortunate as a society that there have been very few truly terrifying totalitarian dictatorships that have come into power in the modern era. The fact of the matter is, most of us are in rooms right now with multiple microphones that are hooked up to the internet in some way. If we lived in a totalitarian society, that would be very easy for government agencies to listen to all of us, and not only listen to all of us, but then come after us and arrest us for the things that we are saying. That is the danger of totalitarianism. A monarchy, then, is a government by a king or queen with succession of rulers kept within the family. Monarchies tend to be much, much more stable than totalitarian societies or dictatorships because they are based on tradition and this family having been in power for forever, right? Now, there's a difference between absolute monarchies and constitutional monarchies. Within an absolute monarchy, the government, within that government, the monarch has complete authority over their subjects. The monarch can do anything, basically, that they feel fit. However, that does not mean that they necessarily do that way. A good example of this in the modern era, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That individual came into quite a degree of political unfavor within his country and internationally a couple years ago, when there's very good evidence to show that he ordered the assassination of a journalist in the nation of Turkey, right? Well, yes, he could not be punished within his country for ordering that, and he had the authority to order that. However, that created a great deal of dislike for him and challenges to his authority within his own country. Basically, it challenged his authority in a very big way. So while he could not be officially put in prison for such a thing, it really messed up his politics, if you will. Now, most monarchies in the modern world are constitutional monarchies, and there aren't very many of these left. Within a constitutional monarchy, there are royal figures whose power is defined by political charter and limited by a parliament or other governing body. We in the United States most typically think of Great Britain in this regard. Now, quite frankly, Great Britain is better described as a parliamentary democracy, but we can kind of still get the idea across of the constitutional monarchy here. In Great Britain, the powers of the Queen are very greatly restricted. She doesn't have very much power at all. Most of the power in Great Britain resides in Parliament, which is their legislative body, which is somewhat similar to our Congress. Really, the functions that the Queen serves is to meet foreign dignitaries. It would be completely normal, for example, for the Vice President to meet with the Queen of England if the Vice President would be visiting the UK. That's something that the Queen does. Or the Queen could be, the Queen gives a address to the United Kingdom every day on Christmas that is very similar to our State of the Union address that occurs in the United States, typically in January. These are the duties of the constitutional monarch. They don't have very much power at all, but they are recognized as being a central figure to the government to a certain degree. Democracy, then, is the principal form of government throughout the world, although in some democracies there are people who do not have as much power as maybe they should. Those people are typically called disenfranchised. That's a condition. So many minority groups, not in the United States, but in other countries as well, are disenfranchised. They don't have as much say as they should have. Within a democracy, citizens are able to participate directly or indirectly in their own governance. Democracy can generally be broken into two categories: representative democracy and direct democracy. Representative democracy is what the vast majority of democracies worldwide do. Within a representative democracy, citizens elect representatives to govern them. So thus, we vote, and based on that voting, those people we vote for, we select to go do what we want them to do, right? And if they don't do what we want them to do, we vote them out of office. That's how our democracy operates. Now, there is this other thing called direct democracy. Now, within a direct democracy, there is far more interplay between the common person and the decisions that are made in government itself. The most classic examples of direct democracy can be found in ancient Greece, but also in the colonial United States, especially in the New England area. In New England, there were very small villages that were largely, were almost entirely isolated. So what they did is they had these town hall meetings in which if someone has a problem, they could come to the town hall meeting, they could address the town hall, and then everyone would have a say in the issue, and decisions would be made in that way. Now, as soon as you think about it, you can think, well, if that gets to be of a bigger scale, it doesn't work anymore, because how does everybody get a say? That's absolutely correct. That's why we don't have very many direct democracies in the world, because those direct democracies, it's a matter of scale, is really what it comes down to. Once it gets big, kind of big, it doesn't work anymore. Now let's talk about where politics, the social institution of politics, meet the social institution of economics. Capitalism is an economic system based on a certain set of ideas. Within capitalism, the capitalist believes in unregulated competition. So from this regard, a capitalist would believe that there should be no government regulations. That if you can make something, if you can sell something to someone, then you should be able to do it in that way. A capitalist believes in the privatization of the means of production. What that means is the capitalist believes that they should be in charge of the entire business enterprise. So nobody should be able to tell a business owner what to do, and the business owner is the ultimate authority in how that business operates. Now, this is the way that businesses are typically run in the United States. When we talk about socialism on the next slide, we will talk about an alternative to that. Additionally then, within capitalist systems, business is operated toward the end of a profit. If you've ever worked for a small business owner, or if ever you've been told by a boss something along the lines of, well, you know, this isn't a charity, we don't just give things away, this is a business. That is a statement of the production of profit. That the way we do business from a capitalist mindset is that we are here to make money. And then capitalism believes that price should be set based on supply and demand. If people are willing to pay a price for something, then they will sell it to somebody for that price. But on the other hand, if people are not willing to pay for something, then that person, that business person, simply won't make any money. Socialism, then, is an economic system based on another set of ideas. And these slides, this slide and the previous one, are intended to be compared with each other. So, a socialist government is one that regulates the economy. So a socialist would say, you can't just sell something and call it medicine if it doesn't actually treat a illness, right? That we have to be able to regulate our economy and be able to regulate what can and can't be sold as a matter of public safety. That's fundamentally a socialist concept. Now, there was a time in the United States when we were far more capitalistic, where it was completely legal to sell something that was not medicine as medicine. But then in the early 20th century, we passed laws surrounding what was called the Food and Drug Act, and really ironed that portion of the economy out. Socialists believe in the collective ownership of the means of production. Now, there are very many ways that this could operate, and Socialist theory has been arguing about this for about 150 years. But here's the basics of it. If you are operating a business from a socialist standpoint, then everybody in the business would have a say on how the business is operated. So you would vote over what kind of pizzas you're going to sell. You would vote over what the special for the week would be. There would be debates among everyone on how much everyone would be paid, and probably everybody would be paid the same amount. And when the business makes a profit, that profit does not go to one person, that profit goes to benefit everybody. A socialist believes on production based on need. So a socialist enterprise does not make things that people do not actually need. If the Apple Corporation, for example, were operated as if it were a socialist enterprise, you would not get be able to buy a new iPhone every couple years. You would get a new chip to insert into your old iPhone to make your old iPhone operate properly, right? We're not just making new versions of things for the sake of making new versions of things. A socialist believes in price being set on labor being put into a product, not supply and demand. So thus, the price you pay for an item that is produced in a socialist way is priced that way because the worker at the beginning is being paid an amount of money that is hypothetically a living wage. We see this in our society most commonly when we look at things like fair trade coffee, fair trade chocolate. The reason why those items are a little bit more expensive is because those businesses are trying to charge based on the work put into the item, not based on the market price. And it should be pointed out that when people in the United States call themselves socialists, as opposed to calling themselves communists, they are probably more reform-minded and want to change society as it exists, as opposed to causing some sort of revolution, which is more common amongst Americans who would call themselves communists. There aren't too many Americans that call themselves communists. There are a growing number of Americans who call themselves socialists. It should be pointed out when we compare these two forms of economy that all nations' economies have both capitalist and socialist aspects. They range on a spectrum. It is an artifact of the Cold War to say that you are either a communist or a capitalist. That doesn't really work, and it never really has worked. It was more of a propaganda concept. The United States does have some socialist economic features. We give money, our government gives money to businesses when they're about ready to fail if that business is critical to the economy. That's almost a socialist idea. We do have market regulations. We regulate what is safe to sell to people, what is safe to sell to people as food, to medicine, whatever. We have public aid programs. We give people money if they are at risk of freezing to death in the wintertime. That is more of a socialist idea than it is a capitalist idea. But then on the other hand, countries that are very much socialistic and government-wise government-wise communistic do have capitalist ventures. There are small businesses in Cuba now. That changed about 15 years ago. Additionally, when we talked in our bit about economics, we talked about informal economies, and many socialist economies do have informal economies, especially when that socialism is heavy-handed, as in communist societies, that people will make things and sell them semi-legally in order to fill in those gaps so that people can survive. The point here being of this not only this lecture but the previous lecture is that socialism is an economic system, communism is a political system, right? Those are different things. Democratic governments can use socialism, and they do, or democratic governments can use capitalism. Totalitarian governments Authoritarian governments can and do use capitalism, but they could also use socialism. It is a matter about how that society individually is structured. It is not about the ideologies of economics. If you have any questions in this regard, please let me know. And that's the end of this lecture.